We are back with more NBA coverage. To get straight into it, we've got to talk about Paul George. Now, obviously, this last season for him was very far from successful, depending on what angle you want to look at it exactly. I mean, when it came to on the court production, and that is if he was even healthy, he played in just half of the games last season. But even when he was actively playing, he was an overall net negative to the team. His overall production dropped. He had some of the worst efficiency of his entire career up to that point. His defense regressed heavily. And there were multiple games where players who in his prime would not stand a chance against Paul George were all of a sudden just having their way with him on a night-to-night basis. It was hard to watch. And honestly, given that he was then 34 years old, in a normal situation, it probably would have been the standard. You're not going to expect an athlete in that context who is that old to perform all that well. And maybe if the 76ers had been a little wiser in acquiring him, then even though they had the championship aspirations, last season wouldn't have been viewed as badly as it is right now. But the team as a whole severely underperformed. Because outside of Paul George, Maxey, and Embiid, even with McCain being there and then also getting hurt, some of the other players on this team were just not truly capable of holding down the mantle through a full 82-game season. You needed all three of those guys to be consistently healthy for this thing to work, and it didn't. You knew what you were doing when you gave Paul George the fourth year of his contract that he was looking for. You ensured that he was going to be around for the long haul. In a matter of less than a full season, now you have talks about wanting to potentially get rid of him. It's not easy to get rid of a 4-year, $212 million contract that fast. Why would they even bother giving him the money if they saw everything that happened beforehand? The regression was starting to happen in Los Angeles as it is. It took a complete and total nosedive last season. And he's only getting older. He's 35 years old. The icing on the cake would be him getting injured in early March and missing the rest of the season due to a knee injury. Now, at that point, the 76ers were already a complete dumpster fire at that point. They were nowhere near contending whatsoever. And again, that is just a testament to how they have completely mismanaged things when it comes to this roster. You just allocated way too much money to the top of your team. And at that time, you didn't really invest in doing much of anything else. But still, even with that, they did luck into the number 3 overall pick and get themselves VJ Edgecombe, which is, a great pickup in this situation. And given the setback that Paul George has now faced, they're certainly going to need him early on. Because it would be detailed that he recently got surgery on this knee after facing yet another situation with it. And so in doing that, he is set to miss some time next season. Potentially the very start. The full extent is unknown right now. But it just continues to be a detriment to what exactly the 76ers are trying to accomplish. When you're giving out that kind of money to somebody, even if they are now 35 years old, you want them to be as available as possible. And Paul George is certainly not in that position right now. Joel Embiid is certainly not in that position right now. And from that standpoint, you can't walk into this season as a 76ers fan expecting them to contend for a title, because there are still too many questions surrounding their overall health as a team, especially when it comes to that of Paul George and Joel Embiid as we stand right now. I will say, when it comes to this, you do hope that Paul George can take the proper time he needs to rest and recover, and also stay low, because even with the injuries and the production waning off, that is still something that the 76ers fans might have been able to deal with, if not for the fucking podcast bullshit. Like, yes, in his position, especially when he got hurt, there aren't too many other things you're going to be able to do. But at the same time, you're playing in these games and playing terribly at that. Then you jump on a podcast, whether it just be you and a co-host or you and another guest on the episode, just talking about whatever. The contents of some of these were just completely tone deaf. Whether it be you talking about Jared McCain or you talking about the state of the team when they're clearly downtrodden at this point, you just completely missed the point of the entire thing. And they were just getting spammed and spammed. Like, there was a graphic that stated he had more episodes on the podcast P shit than points scored, I think? Nah. Because that would be insane. But in any case, there's no way that the amount of episodes you generate should be outweighing any sort of contributions that you put up on a basketball court. Like, it's just not a good look. So if he needs to take that time off, he's obviously going to have to. But stay low, bro. Because it's just going to continue to irritate the 76ers fans to see you doing this shit, instead of trying to get healthy and get back on the court so that you can do what it is you have to do to help the team. Like, let's be honest, there's still a chance for him to return and be a capable enough player to help them get by. But if you're relying on just him to be healthy, I don't really think you can expect that at that point. He's still a respectable enough defender. His size is going to give him that advantage no matter how old he is. And there are still going to be games where he'll go off for you. That's just how talented he is. So I'm not saying that he can't return and make an impact, but you have to make yourself as available as possible. And the process has to start then. Like, even in a podcast, I think around the same time that this news was reported, they were just going after this man. I think it was Gilly the Kid on his podcast, just letting him have it about the fucking 76ers and the state of that team. Just trying to speak directly to this man Paul George's heart. And it seemed like even in that moment, Paul George was kind of confused. He didn't really understand what was going on. Like, at some point, it's got to click for you, bro. Because if things don't pan out like this and you continue to regress, there is a universe in which the 76ers could decide to move on from you and not have a care in the world about it. So that's how I would see that for him. As for the team, though, yes, you are still in the process of trying to contend. So you're going to want to be at full strength. At the very least, as long as Maxey and Embiid stay healthy, they're certainly going to hold down the fort without Paul George. And not to mention, too, in Paul George's absence, you have a grand opportunity to help some of your young talent develop. Jared McCain, of course, is going to come back with the chance to play a full season as well and build off of what he was doing in the early part of his campaign last year. VJ Edgecombe is a very promising prospect and is certainly going to need early reps in order to develop as well. So that just clears up space for those two guys to enter the rotation a little bit. And not to mention some of the other younger players that they've brought back, like a Justin Edwards, is going to get more attention than he ever has with the team before. And this is off of an extension he's recently gotten with them. So, if you can build up your depth without Paul George, when he comes back, you know that some of the pressure in that moment would be taken off of him just a little bit. When it comes to later games in the season, marquee matchups, and potential postseason games, you're going to want him to hone his skills there and kind of conserve himself for those moments, because that is where you're going to need him at the most. If you try to make him the focal point of every single offensive set earlier on in the season, his body could just simply wear down by the time it's a situation where you need his services. Or otherwise, you potentially lose out of a ball game. So rather than, just sulk at not having the greatest championship opportunity right now, just try to bring some of your younger players along and accelerate the developmental process that they have. Because they aren't going to be around for much longer when it comes to Paul George as it is. And maybe even Joel Embiid could be reaching that territory at some point because of his own health issues. So you want to make the most of this here, but you also want to try to establish something for a future beyond both of those players and involving Tyrese Maxey. That's the way I see it. The NBA could potentially be expanding within the next few years. According to an article from Bleacher Report, essentially these talks have been in play for pretty much the last 5 years now, but what ended up happening was that the NBA, as it quote states here, put the topic of expansion on the back burner because they needed to get the CBA done, and they also have the media rights deal kicking in this year rather. It was finalized last year, and that has seen the value of some of these NBA teams rise exponentially. I mean, hell, we did hear the reports of the Celtics franchise selling for $6.1 billion and the Lakers franchise selling for $10.1. That is completely insane. So, with all that coming into play and the room for more money to work with, they feel as though it's a proper chance to establish at least a foundation for maybe a couple of teams to join the league within the next few years. Now, granted, there's no clarity on if they're actually going to do it or not, but a plan could be in the works. Now, a couple of the cities that they would be looking at would obviously be Las Vegas and also Seattle, of course. But as some of the paragraphs allude to here, the NBA would also be looking potentially into Vancouver, Louisville, Kansas City, Nashville, Montreal, and even Mexico. Now, when it comes to other potential locations, like they mentioned London and a few other European cities, but as it states here, time zones could create a massive issue. Like, how would you even be sure that these players who would opt in a hypothetical situation to play for these overseas teams, how can you ensure that they are going to be able to adjust to that schedule on the other side of the world, essentially, and still have enough energy to play games in a manner that syncs up the time with that of NBA games played in the US? It's just a very complex process to go through, so I don't really know about that. I mean, that's kind of the same thing when you think about football in London, even, and we know how much people would love that. That's still something you have to think about there. So it's like, shit. But what would happen in a situation where the NBA expands is that although percentages that players get from overall revenue would be high, still, in terms of the weight of the distribution across the league, some of the prices would get slashed. According to a quote here, the cost to teams long term is a smaller piece of the pie, as instead of 1/30th of the team's share of national broadcast revenue, they receive 1/32. So that percentage just gets even smaller from that standpoint, because they have to make sure that every single team is getting fed a fairly equal amount, even when you think about all of the different factors like market size and so on and so forth. They've got to make sure that happens, especially for the franchises that do join, because for the first few years, I believe, as the article goes on to detail later on, the NBA does assist them with operations and other working costs. And then they have to abide by financial rules in the league that other teams follow in like the third year of existence. So you want to try to balance that all out. You can't have that out of order. So it makes sense. And another potential effect of this is that with 32 teams coming in at this point, there might be some realignment between at least a few teams or so in terms of just changing from the Eastern Conference to the Western Conference and vice versa. They state right here that the Grizzlies, Pelicans, and Timberwolves could be candidates to move from the Western Conference to the Eastern Conference simply due to a geographical lens. And honestly, I'm not going to lie, when you think about it, I would probably say the Grizzlies would be up to move the most. Even Bleacher Report states in this article that the Pelicans or Grizzlies have an easy out if they need to take it. But honestly, like, the Grizzlies are literally based in Tennessee. Like, that southern strip happens to be right near Georgia, happens to be right near Florida. you could certainly afford to have them in like the Southeast Division as they also stay here. That wouldn't be hard at all. But also, I feel like it would be a little weird to have 5 teams in a division. So there's a chance that you could see additional divisions on both sides. Typically, at least in this modern NBA, there have been 3 divisions for each conference. So if you add at least one team to both sides, then that could lead to at least a 4-division, 4-team style for either conference, which would make the most sense, in my opinion. But yeah, there's nothing going to be set in stone yet. According to an article from the Associated Press, it states that they are going to have a meeting in September for the Board of Governors talk, I guess. I don't know if this will be figured out by then, but at the very least, if they continue to work on it amongst the groups they've set out to handle this task, then, they could reconvene at this point with a more fleshed out purpose as to what they plan to do with this. And if they plan to do it at all, and if so, more logistics on what this would look like overall. There's a lot of progress to be made, but it seems like they're going in a reasonable trajectory. The Clippers would get active by first taking on Bradley Beal after he got bought out by the Suns. And again, like I said in that moment, Suns fans had to rejoice. Because now you give Jalen Green the proper room to actually try to contribute to your team. It still hurts that Bradley Beal will be on your payroll as one of the highest paid players for at least the next few seasons because of the nature of the waive and stretch tactic. They have to pay him at least like $20 to $22 million per year or something like that. So, yeah, good luck with that. But at the very least, he's off your team. You'll take it. And the Clippers, honestly, while I do question whether Bradley Beal would start or come off the bench at the same time, it is a good move when you think about it. Because they would sign him for a 2-year, $11 million deal. And as a pundit put it greatly when I was watching the shows talk about this, to have him put up the numbers he did last season on a $5.5 million deal compared to a monster $50 million contract, that is a steal. Like 17 points per game on 49.7% shooting, 38.6% shooting from deep, and also 3.7 assists. All you're asking him to do, and especially if he comes off the bench, is just go get a bucket. And you can have him do that for dirt cheap compared to what the hell he was getting in Phoenix. That's a monster move right there. Now, I'm not going to compare him to some of the better 6 men to come through that Clippers organization like Jamal Crawford or Lou Williams. I'm not going to go as far as to do that because you still have to be efficient enough. But, he can be that additional scoring punch if there are nights when James Harden or Kawhi Leonard just don't have it. That could be their secret weapon to an extent. And from that standpoint, again, it's a smart move. But again, that backcourt, if he does start, yeah, Bradley Beal and James Harden are going to get cooked like some fucking rice. I can tell you that right now. If he starts alongside him. And honestly, there could be nights when that happens. I may as well pair this up with it because it goes hand in hand. But the Clippers would also make a move that is pretty wholesome, but also confusing to an extent. Because they would sign Chris Paul to a 1-year contract. Again, hey, he comes to the place where he, as people could argue honestly, has had the most success in his career. I mean, his tenure with the Clippers in the late 2000s, early 2010s saw him become a franchise staple and honestly helped him ascend to become one of the best point guards of the generation. I mean, in Los Angeles for those 6 years, he averaged 18.8 points per game to go along with 9.8 assists per game and 4.2 rebounds on 47.5% shooting from the field and 37.8% shooting from deep. Multiple seasons in a row saw him become a top 10 finisher in MVP voting. He was also adept at getting so many damn steals. He had 3 straight seasons with them, leading the league in steals at around 2.4. He made multiple all-defensive teams, first-team selections at this time, because honestly back then you could make the argument that steals were highly valued for guards at this point. You know, whether or not you think highly of that, that's still pretty damn good stuff. He made the All-Star in 5 straight seasons with them as well. So it's been a long time coming because the split was ugly. And you definitely saw that in his Rockets days whenever they matched up against the Clippers. It was just terrible. I mean, man, Chris Paul and Blake Griffin could not stand each other during that point of time. And there were games in which you saw it reach a boiling point. Like, there was a game where Blake Griffin was matching up against the Rockets, and they just consistently got into verbal quarrels to the point where Griffin got ejected from the game, essentially. And the tension just would not stop in the postgame either. I don't know if some Clippers fans have truly forgotten about that. Like, some people may still hold a little resentment about it, but, you know, hey, Chris Paul will forever be a legend in that uniform. So to have him return for a 1-year deal when he's already stated that this would likely be the last season of his career before hanging up the basketball shoes, it just makes perfect sense from that standpoint. He's going to finish where he had his greatest success as a basketball player to this point. On the flip side, they have Chris Paul projected to be a starter because, let's be honest, he has not been willing to come off the bench at all. It has been a rarity for him. So to expect him to do it now in his farewell tour is just a pipe dream. It's not going to happen. And that's the scary part. You want Chris Paul at this stage in the NBA. Like, he could get away with it in the early 2010s because pure point guards at that size were a lot more valued at this point. Now you have him being 5'11", 5'10", rather, 6 foot. He seems more like 5'11" at this point. Nonetheless, he is very much an undersized point guard in today's NBA. His defense has not even remotely been what it was since his Clippers tenure, to be honest. And it's just gotten worse and worse every season. So to expect him to continue to pick pockets at a high rate right now is also just very, hard to imagine. It's just not going to be the case. At 40 years old, you have him starting back there, potentially, with James Harden, who is now 36-year-old, playing at the 2. Yes, it is a rental, but at the same time, that's got to be the oldest backcourt pairing, if not one of the oldest backcourt pairings in the entire league. And even when Paul and Harden were both in their primes, as we saw with them being on the Rockets with each other, they couldn't play a lick of defense then. You think they're going to be able to stop a lick now? When they're older and by the concept of age past their primes, both of them? And again, with having Bradley Beal as well, now being near his mid-30s as well, that has got to be one of the oldest backcourt trios. That is just crazy. So defense in that backcourt is going to be an issue. Let's just get that very clear. At the same time, Kawhi Leonard is also old in his own right. So if we're talking about a potential big 3, big 4, geez. You, with getting James Harden to sign an extension, with you getting Kawhi Leonard to sign an extension, and with bringing Chris Paul back, this season or next season have to be it in terms of getting a championship. If you don't even get remotely close in that time, you gotta blow it up. Because there's just, you have too much money wrapped up in some of the oldest players imaginable. Brook Lopez provides good defense, but even he is also a player who has recently been signed for them. He commands a decent amount of money, and he's currently 37 years old. But you'll still have Lopez off the bench. You have Ivica Zubac, and you have a much younger John Collins, who all provide very solid defense. So that should serve as a complementary aspect of that team. And honestly, for their sake, it better. Because there's just no way. Speaking of franchise legends returning to places they once called home, Damian Lillard would also do something even more sentimental, returning on a 3-year, $42 million deal to Portland. Immediately after the trade that sent him away to Milwaukee, he kind of mentioned a reality where in the future, down the line, he could return to the Trailblazers and potentially retire there, hoping and asking for the fans' forgiveness over the course of this time in the process. And I'm going to be honest, so many fans, especially of that franchise, and even in the general NBA, were just heartbroken about it. You mean to tell me that one of the most, if not the most, loyal player in franchise history, let alone one of the best, if not the best at the time, player in franchise history, just up and leaves to a stacked Bucks team at the time with a undeniable superstar in Giannis Antetokounmpo. Undeniable. If not one of the top 3 players in the league, especially at that point, to try to win a championship rather than try to stick it out through this process and be a Blazer for life. they couldn't bear that reality. And it's been a rough few years since then, honestly, for both sides. You know, the Trailblazers, although they did get a pretty good haul from the trade, because while Robert Williams III hasn't done much of anything, some of the picks that they have gotten back have been put to really good use. They eventually flipped one of those assets, I believe, for Danny Avdia, and he's been a great player for them. Tamani Kamara has developed into a very respectable defender in the NBA as a wing. I couldn't have seen that coming because I literally did not know in the moment who the hell he was. But as I've continued to reiterate throughout the recaps in this season, with him accomplishing what he has to this point, he's now made himself a fan favorite in that city. And you get to retain that while also bringing back Drew Holiday via trade this season. Like, that's just all coming full circle. So you figured that something like this, it was only a matter of time before it was going to happen. But at the same time, you got to look at this from Damian Lillard's perspective, in that it goes a lot further than just the basketball aspect. He's obviously not going to play this season. And, you know, he'll be spending a lot of time trying to get his body right, get back to a healthy state, and also just be around his family. That, above all, might have stood out to be the most important factor leading into this decision for Damian Lillard at multiple points in Milwaukee. Even within like the first few weeks of him being there, he mentioned how lonely he felt up there in Milwaukee because of the fact that his family, a great portion of his family, was in Portland. And obviously during the brunt of the NBA season, you're not going to be able to travel all across the country like that. You have to stay connected with the team in some capacity, and you're going to have your own personal space in the city in which you play. If your family's not there, you're not really going to be able to have that direct contact with them. And that's what the situation was for Damian Lillard. He reiterated this throughout his entire tenure there about how much he wanted to see his children, his family in general. And it just could not happen. When it comes to the basketball aspect, injuries derailed the entire tenure. And Milwaukee, for as hyped up as the team was, did not make it out of the first round in either one of the seasons that Damian Lillard was there, partially due to injuries that he suffered. I mean, he missed time in the Bucks-Pacers series in 2024, and then obviously tore his Achilles in the 2025 rematch of that very same matchup in the first round. And that moment where he's just realizing what happened and sitting on the court as they wait to call the damn timeout, that is going to be the searing image of what was his final game in a Milwaukee Bucks uniform. That's just terrible shit to have to go through. And it got even a little crazier because you think at that point that now that he's out of commission per se, you'd think he would have the right in that moment to try, if he could, to go and see his family in Portland. And I think there was a report that mentioned he was trying to do this. However, the Bucks would not allow him to go to Portland while he was still on the roster and visit his family during the rehab process. And I'm like, that's kind of weird. Like, you're not doing anything right now. You're not still alive in playoff contention. The season's done for you. And you've got all these other players going around doing these things. Why don't you have any room to allow Damian Lillard to just go back home and handle that? Maybe in that moment they were fearing that Lillard could potentially move on. But at the same point, they would turn around. That tune would change as they would turn around and waive and stretch his contract to where he was left to be a free agent. And in that moment, with all of those things piling up, the opportunity game for the Trailblazers to take him back, and a lot of different analysts and pundits tried to throw out different smoke screens about certain teams. The Celtics were a team that was consistently thrown out in the sweepstakes for Damian Lillard, and they actually had a good chance because they cited that Lillard and Tatum had a pretty close relationship as a part of the 2020 Olympic squad. So, like, maybe that would have been the case, but at the same time, you would really think that the Celtics would take on another player just to have two players dealing with Achilles injuries not play for you in the very next season, and bank on the notion of Damian Lillard potentially coming back with a vengeance. And similarly with Tatum, although he's obviously younger, so there's a greater chance for him. You're thinking that duo, along with Jaylen Brown still being there at the moment, all of them are going to need the ball in some capacity. None of them have proven that they do the best with playing off the ball. Although, Tatum and Brown will have their nights in doing it, because obviously if one doesn't have it, the other's going to, or the other will try to consistently set up each other in the moment. That's just how that goes. But that wouldn't have panned out. And the Trailblazers are kind of set up for the future. It's not a move that may get them back in contending for a championship, but at the very least, it could be a playoff team once more. I mean, we're talking about a player in Damian Lillard who has tremendous playoff experience. And his general resume speaks for itself in the NBA. So to have some of these younger guards like Shaedon Sharpe and Scoot Henderson learn from him, for real this time, as he sits out this season, and then they get to see him in full action next year, play alongside them, and pick up tools of the trade that way, it's going to do dividends for all of their paths of development, without question. But when it comes to the backcourt, it gets a little crazy, because you're still in a spot where you may want to have Jrue Holiday start. Now, I don't know if you want him playing either the 1 or the 2, but you're going to need him to complement Damian Lillard in some way, because the dynamic is still there where Jrue Holiday is a much better defender than Damian Lillard ever has been. But how much can you truly bank on that when Jrue Holiday is right around that same age in his respective right? Like, he is also 35 years old at this point. So how exactly would that work? I'm not entirely sure. And that's going to be the tricky thing. Because when Damian Lillard comes back, you're still going to be taking minutes away from a guy like Scoot Henderson, I would believe. I wouldn't expect Shaedon Sharpe to play point guard. I couldn't see that happening at all. But when it comes to Scoot Henderson, this season is likely going to see him start way more games. And, learning from Damian Lillard is great and all. So he could have one of his more productive seasons to date. But if that does happen, it would just hinder his development to have him come back off the bench next year for Damian Lillard. So the dynamic in that aspect is a little weird, but all in all, basketball isn't the priority with this move. It's about allowing Damian Lillard to literally go back home and see his family and kids. And it's also about the fans being able to see Damian Lillard, at least for the fans that were there in Lillard's early tenure, they get to see a proper close to his career. And for the newer generation of NBA fans, especially of that team who just missed out on Damian Lillard's tenure in Portland, they at least get to see a glimpse of what some of these other guys experienced in the 2010s. All right. The Wizards would buy out Marcus Smart, and he would sign with the Lakers. A lot of the Lakers' moves here kind of tie in, so I'll just cover them all. It makes sense. But as for Marcus Smart here, you can see why they made the move. He is 31, but that's not that old. It has been a little bit since he's been productive, though. And granted, that's because he was stuck in fucking Washington for at least the last half season. But health has also been a huge factor into some of the decline here. Like, he's only played in 54 combined games in the last 2 seasons. So, while I do believe that he could be a great addition, the priority is to have him available. Because if he isn't, well, you're kind of stuck in the same spot if you're the Lakers. But with what he can provide to them, good old hard-nosed defense. Simply put, we're talking about the first guard since Sidney Moncrief to win the Defensive Player of the Year award in the 2022 season, where he also made the All-Defensive First Team and contended at least, for the NBA title, even if they didn't win. Like, he was a huge piece of that roster. And many people have argued that he was the heart and soul of that team. But I guess the Celtics brass didn't really agree when they elected to send him over to Memphis. Now again, it wasn't all bad there, but you just had to be available. Still, you can ensure that when you are facing elite teams, you know that you have a guy in Marcus Smart who can easily guard the best player on that squad. Easily. Even if he is just 6'3", he plays much bigger than his size. And he has just a great balance of physicality and technique as well to invoke that sort of resistance and make sure that he's stopping their greatest player at every turn. The Lakers at this point do not have another guard that can do that for them right now. I suppose that Marcus Smart would be a bench player in this system because to have Austin Reeves go back to that role after the season he's just had might pose a little bit of a risk, especially with him looking for a contract extension this offseason. That might not be the most intuitive thing to do. But still, it'll just give them even more energy, which is exactly what they're looking for as well. Because you're asking guys like Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves to do things they are not good at all. And all of it exerts way more energy out of them over the course of an entire NBA game. So it's not a truly reliant thing whatsoever. But that is certainly not a problem for Marcus Smart. To make these things work, though, they would waive both Jordan Goodwin and Shake Milton. Both of them did not really play the best for the Lakers at all. Shake Milton logged DNP after DNP. He wasn't even a usable asset on this team. And then Jordan Goodwin, he got some playing time and he had a few solid games every now and then, but man, there were just moments this season, well, the last NBA season, that this man had or contributed to that just made you scratch your fucking head completely. Like, he would just get so discombobulated that JJ Redick had no choice but to bench his ass immediately. And if you can't count on your role players to step up, you're not going to eventually go very far. That's exactly why the Lakers had the downfall they did in the first round against the Timberwolves. Like, they did try to play him at times, but they just couldn't count on him. And as a result, he did not do much in the final few games of that series. And with the way those games were played, they could have very much used some help. So even if Marcus Smart isn't necessarily considered the best offensive player in the world, he should still provide you with a good enough scoring output off the bench to not be considered an offensive liability and far from a defensive liability. Whereas you couldn't say the same for either of those two players. In turn, the Lakers would also get a couple of Summer League guys. They would re-sign Christian Koloko to an NBA contract. He's been in that system for years and honestly hasn't done that much. But when you look at the fact that they are still in need of a center, he's 25 years old. He's 7'1". He has the tangible aspects you would need to be a true big man. And if they want to make themselves deep enough, while the production isn't all there, his efficiency did increase to 60.6% shooting in his appearances. So that's something you can build on at least with him. Also, they would sign Chris Manon. He was on the Warriors Summer League team. And on a team looking for defense and looking for great wing depth, Manon seems like an interesting selection. Like, they tried to label him, a notification came through my phone from Fox Sports on it. They tried to label both of these players as big men. Manon is far from a big man. Let's just get that out of the way right now. But at the very least, he could serve as a pretty good defender and rebounder. Like, at multiple points in these Warriors Summer League games that I saw, he was just hustling his ass off for rebound after rebound. And the defense was solid. I mean, hell, when you look at the fact that he's coming out of the Vanderbilt system, and judging by the fact that Aaron Nesmith is also from the Vanderbilt system, I'm not saying he's going to turn into the next Aaron Nesmith. But what I am saying is that you could get a pretty solid wing player here. And the Lakers seem to see it that way. So, Manon is not an NBA level player. They have him on a two-way contract as well. But hey, you know, if a specific game calls for him to be in, they'll probably elevate him. So, shit. The Bulls, in other Summer League news, would sign Yuki Kawamura to a two-way contract. He was obviously let go by the Grizzlies and had a pretty spectacular Summer League performance. So this contract is well-deserved. Again, with Josh Giddey being the starting ball handler, he won't get a lot of opportunities there. But as a two-way player, if he continues to do well in the G League, he could elevate into a solid bench piece for them. The Bulls, at multiple points over the last 2 decades, have had some pretty respectable point guards. I mean, we think back to Kirk Heinrich. We obviously have Derrick Rose to consider. Like they've had some quality guys come through that system, and Yuki Kawamura could find himself on the same path. Again, his size does leave a lot to be desired, though, and that is what is truly hindering him from getting a lot of time in the NBA. Like a 5'8", less than 160-pound man trying to make it on an NBA court, where, again, the average point guard in today's league probably stands at around 6'5". Or at least that's what most teams would look for in a perfect world. And he's certainly not going to be able to hang with them on the defensive end. That is it, though. But he's certainly got the progression to at least reach role player status in the league. Derik Queen of the Pelicans will miss the next 3 months, and by that logic, potentially at least the first couple games of the season, recovering from a torn scapholunate ligament in his left wrist. Apparently, that is one of the key joints in the region, connecting to the wrist to other tendons in the area. So it would definitely hinder his ability to do much of anything with any sort of item right now. The rest is certainly needed there. Because dribbling, shooting, passing, even getting steals, grabbing rebounds would be very difficult if your wrist is essentially broken. But that'll do it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.